Welcome, everybody. This is another one of our weekly webinars with Alberta Prosperity Project, where we endeavor to enlighten and educate Albertans about what's going on and hopefully make their life better. Tonight is a little bit different because Dr. Dennis Modry and myself, Sean Hamilton, are replacing Chris Scott and Kerry Parker, and we have a wonderful guest tonight by the name of Mr. Gwyn Morgan. Gwyn has been in the oil and gas industry for a long time, but he is now retired. He started off with Alberta Energy Company way back in the 70s under the tutelage of Mr. David E. Mitchell. He then went on to become CEO of Encana, and that was the largest independent oil and gas company in Canada. He's also been CEO of the Year. He's had an unbelievable extensive business career and very successful. So please welcome Gwyn Morgan and Dr. Dennis Modry to our webinar tonight.
Howdy.
Evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Yeah.
Well,
all right.
Do you want to say a word, Dennis? Go ahead.
Sure. Gwen, I'm delighted. It's been a long time since we had you over for dinner out in Riverbend. But you'll well recall a couple conversations we had maybe a year and a half ago or so. A lot has happened since then. I've always enjoyed reading your editorials in the Financial Post, and the two most recent ones that you published. One, Trudeau Liberals are gutting Canada's economic well-being, and the other, the painful return to energy supply reality. And of course, this deals with, or sort of segues into a discussion. And I'd just like to open it up to you, Gwyn, and pose the question. We're seeing a tremendous amount of pressure coming at our oil and gas industry from the climate change narrative, articulating a net zero future. You have come out and stated previously that this is folly, this is unnecessary. Would you like to elaborate on, what we're facing as a tremendous dilemma for our economic well-being and our energy future?
Well, thanks, Dennis. The thing about what's going on with energy future and emissions and all that, I covered in my most recent newspaper column, and basically, if I could boil it all down, we're killing our economy. We're destroying people's welfare and their futures, not just in Alberta but elsewhere. With these carbon taxes and all these other things, Alberta, of course, is the engine of the economy of Canada. We send more money to Ottawa and everywhere else with taxes and so on, but that's not appreciated. But the point I really want to make is that, and I made in the column, is that when you want to change something, you have to look at what needs to be changed, and not have a whole bunch of rhetoric around stuff that makes no difference. The reality is that Canada is like 0.14% of the world emissions. Well, I guess it's only 2%, but anyway, it doesn't make any difference. And if we took every car off the road in Canada for a year, the emissions saved would be replaced by China in 96 hours. 96 hours, took all the cars off the road. So much for carbon taxes and electric cars and all that. The reality is we have to go where the emissions are and see if we can do something about that, and that's China.
Mm-hmm.
So my most recent column was basically saying, okay, China has been playing this charade game. They keep saying they're going to lower emissions. They keep saying they're working on lessening their coal-fired power, and yet they keep adding 2 plants a week. So it's a big rate. Unfortunately, the Liberal government has bought into it, and they just don't seem to understand that unless we do something about China, there's no hope.
Mhm.
China actually produces more emissions than all of the Western countries, including the EU and all the other developed countries in the world together.
Mhm.
So what we really need to look at is, okay, we've got this carbon tax. I mean, the Canadian Manufacturers Association and Export Association basically put out this plea that said, we can't continue to develop and produce jobs in manufacturing in Canada because we're stymied by the taxes, carbon taxes, and we can't compete with China. So what I've said is, look here, let's look at it this way. Let's take the carbon tax. Let's take the carbon tax and move it off the shoulders of Canadians, average Canadians and business people, and put it on a tax on the imports from China. Just move it over. And then we're going to actually do some good because it's going to reduce some of the emissions from the place that's causing them anyway. But we're also going to then unleash the economy of Canada, including Alberta.
Mhm.
We're going to stop trying to find ways of diminishing Alberta's prosperity and cutting the production and investment and turn it around the other way. So basically, we're in this reality check that all of the stuff that we're doing in Canada, everything that we're doing, all the terrible policies that are really not only against Alberta, but against the economy of the country, we're doing it for no good reason. And even the average individual is paying these carbon taxes, and it's doing no good. So why don't we go to where the heart of the problem is, and that's doing something about China. That's the essence of it.
Okay.
This-
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, the real sad part is with these carbon taxes is if the average person and maybe the person that has less of a thicker wallet, they're going to be affected the most here. And of course, we have the government telling that they're going to look after those people while they're doing the exact opposite with these carbon taxes. And it's really very sad. It's as if there was no critical thinking in this legislation whatsoever.
Well, there certainly isn't. But the parliamentary budget officer came out fairly recently and said that unfortunately the carbon taxes are the hardest, as you just stated. They're harder on the people who have the least can afford it, because if you're just barely getting by, and you're trying to get to work in your car or whatever, you get, and also it affects everything. It affects the supply chain. God knows the price of groceries has been going up really fast. So what's going on here is we're actually making it harder for Canadians. And the parliamentary budget officer said that it's the people on low income, which are supposed to be, this is supposed to be a government, these governments of Trudeau and the NDP leader, they say they're out for the little guy, but actually what they're doing is hurting them the most.
Right. Gwyn, you brought up, and Sean, you've touched on the issue of the carbon tax. And just to recall, it wasn't that long ago that the Alberta Court of Appeal ruled that it was unconstitutional, the implementation of a carbon tax. And of course, the federal government appealed that to the Supreme Court. And, the Supreme Court twisted themselves into a pretzel and wrapped themselves around with the climate change narrative, stating that the climate change issue is the most important issue that we have to deal with. Therefore, the carbon tax is justifiable. We're now facing the next Supreme Court decision, which will be the Impact Assessment Act, Bill C-69, which doesn't just affect building new pipelines in Alberta. It also affects infrastructure in general, the Impact Assessment Act. That ruling will be coming out shortly. The question is, we keep seeing what's happening with this quote unquote settled science on climate and the net zero objective. And what can we, what do you think? I have some ideas, but what do you think, Gwyn, is the solution to effectively push back against the narrative that the science is settled?
Well, Dennis, I agree with that this isn't settled, but I've concluded a long time ago that's not going to get us anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so much. I mean, this has become a religion.
Yes.
And so, I mean, there are some really convincing and thorough and professional analysis that says probably it's the sun cycles. 90% is sun cycles.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just like talking into a black hole right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I've concluded that forget about that argument, because that's a whole different one that we can't win right now. But what we should be able to win is doing something about the country that's causing a problem and taking all of trying to not try to stop people like the province of Alberta and the rest of the country from being prosperous. It just doesn't makes no sense.
Let me give you a parallel argument regarding settled science. This is sort of interesting, but it segues into the next question that I want to pose to you. Prior to 1982, the medical profession worldwide believed that gastroduodenal ulcers and gastritis were due to alcohol, tobacco, eating fatty foods, etc., and spicy foods, things like that. Well, in 1982, two scientists from Australia by the name of Barry Marshall and Robin Warren, there were physician researchers, discovered the bacterium Helicobacter pylori, which has been proven to cause 95% of all duodenal ulcers, gastric ulcers, and even carcinoma of the stomach. But for the next 23 years, it wasn't very well accepted by the medical profession until 2005. And you know what happened in 2005 to change the perception, or to change the understanding by the medical profession? The two scientists won the Nobel Prize. So for their discovery of Helicobacter pylori. So the point that I'm getting at in terms of settled science also gets to what's happened recently. On August the 13th, and you might have seen this, Gwyn, I think, Sean, you've seen this. Yeah. On August the 13th, 1,609 scientists, including two Nobel Prize winners, published the World Climate Declaration, in which the two key points made was, one, there's no climate emergency, and two, CO2 is beneficial to the plant, to plant life, and to the planet, and to mankind. So given the minimal amount of anthropogenic CO2 production, and you've already articulated that, the point that I'm getting at is the science, in my opinion, is not settled. And have you seen that declaration?
Oh, I've seen all this stuff, Dennis. I watch all this carefully. But as I said earlier,
yeah,
if you're in fast waters and it's moving quickly, it's hard to throw a line out and say we're going to change things for now.
Right.
I think, and when all you have to do is look at the wildfires and everything, and people are just every day they get pounded into their heads that it's all climate change.
I know.
It's all global warming. So yeah. when you have that whole I don't have enough time in my life to try to change that. But what I can change, I think, what I'm trying to change is get rid of all this stuff that's hampering the country, the province, people, causing extra expense they don't have, and do something about where if they want to reduce emissions, don't say that doesn't matter. That's not going to get you anywhere.
Yeah.
But if you point out there's one country in the world that dominates emissions, and Canada, and we could shut Canada down entirely, it wouldn't change a damn thing.
Yeah.
So let's work on the country that's on the problem where the problem is, and do something about it. And I think there's, I think that people in this country are starting to really realize that we can't. The reality is we're not going to change anything by taking all these sacrifices and increasing the cost of groceries and gasoline, and it's not going to accomplish anything, because that's not where the problem is.
Right.
And so that's how I've always approached life. That's how I built my company. I looked at all this kind of stuff and I figured out what's important now and what can we do.
So Gwyn, how much, sorry, Dennis.
No, go ahead, Sean.
How much of a role do you think the media is playing in all this? Because, if it wasn't for people like you and some others online, writing terrific articles for, some of us to read, the media is really not helping anything.
Well, that's a whole bigger issue, Sean. The media, the mainstream media in this country, most of them anyway, are they follow the rhetoric. I mean, there's lots of people who believe that the COVID vaccine causes after effects or side effects, but when you have you can't talk about those things. You can't say that the people who are to go to the whole pandemic thing. The thing that I can't figure out is if the vaccines were going to prevent the disease, why were the people worried about the people who weren't vaccinated?
Exactly.
Right.
It's a pretty simple thing,
Well, that's a very important subject, and that's a segue into a suggestion I'm going to throw at you. So if you take the COVID narrative that was conventional out there, the mainstream media gaslit that like crazy. Even in caucus, the Alberta caucus, so people like Peter McCullough, Robert Malone, Paul Alexander, Roger Hodkinson, and myself, we had a meeting with 12 or 14 UCP, United Conservative Party MLAs, to help convince them, to convince Jason Kenney to have a caucus meeting with Dina Hinshaw, who was promoting the conventional narrative, and the rest of us giving the alternative narrative. Point that I'm getting at is what we're not hearing in the mainstream media with COVID. What we didn't hear with COVID-19 was the opposing views in the scientific community. And I'm a scientist. I've published many papers. And you look at the methodology when you want to determine whether or not the science is valid. If the methodology is not valid, the outcome is suspect. So the point that I'm getting at is we never had, at the level of government, a debate with respect to the science. So here we are now with climate change, and we're being gaslit again by the media, the bought and paid media. And so the suggestion could be, why not have, for example, if Daniel Smith was willing to do this, Daniel Smith, along with Scott Moe and maybe other provincial leaders from certain US states, come together and finance a scientific public inquiry on the issue of CO2 in relation to climate change. that would be, this was not necessarily my idea. I'm going to give credit to a lawyer by the name of Brian Heck, who twigged me on this idea. But I think it speaks to the issue of looking at both sides of an argument.
Well, Dennis, let me just say that I guess I'm saying the same thing over and over again. This isn't just the media. The media isn't causing all of the angst about CO2. It's become it's way more than that.
I know.
And so this is when something becomes that ensconced. You know, there doesn't make, you can't change that.
Okay.
That's why I focus on why we're impoverishing our people in this country and our industries.
Yeah.
When the problem really is not going to do any good. So even if you believe in global warming, you believe in CO2, even if you have all that, the reality is that we're not helping people. You know, people, excuse me, this is an extreme, but we have these cruise ships come into the harbor here in Victoria. And so the government, the province, I guess it was city there, the province, decided to spend $9 million so that they could shut their engines off just when they're at the shore and use electric power. Like when you have that kind of ridiculous reactions, it you know, you just say, okay, let's change the channel. And that's what I try to change the channel.
Okay, yeah, I think a lot of us do try and change the channel. So is what you're saying then, if I were to, and Sean, you know, kick in on this, what you're suggesting, I think, is for people out there to recognize that the net zero climate policies are harming them as a means of waking them up.
Well, I wouldn't, I'm not even have to go there. You see that again, when you say that, you know, then you say, then you get back into the whole thing about what are you going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? Isn't that what we have to do? But when you talk about the current, you know, the net zero stuff is so far off, and it's really impractical anyway. And you know, we know that, and more people I think are beginning to believe that. But the channel really is okay. Nothing we can do here makes a difference. So we're impoverishing our people, and let's go. If we really even accept that this CO2 is a problem, let's go to where the problem is. And what we're doing here is attacking the province of Alberta. We're eroding the main financial anchor of government revenue across the country, or at least because of how much Alberta provides. And we're also impoverishing people across the country.
Yeah.
So why would we do that when we're not the problem? That's the only way I can. That's the only way I can come at this.
Right. So I just want to point back to your article here about how China is building two new coal plants every week, and yet we have our environmental minister Stephen Guilbeault going over there trying to change them. To me, that just seems a total waste of time, because he's not going to ever change that country. And the other thing too is they have that I forget the acronym is CCICED. Apparently, we're funding them, and I don't know how much we're funding them.
Yeah,
That's absolutely ludicrous.
yeah.
It's
And the Chinese are sitting there saying, "Oh, we're helping the world by having these meetings, and to have our environment minister go to a Chinese controlled and run meetings where there's probably 40 Chinese people to the guests, and become not only that, become vice chairman of that organization, is is scandalous. But Gilbert Cabot is, he's the guy that was climbing towers and hanging out before, when he was with the what was it, um, whatever environmental group it was.
I think Greenpeace maybe.
Yeah, and so this guy is off the rails, but unfortunately, he's off the rails and helping destroy the country along with his boss.
It's rather more targeted, though. Do you not think, Gwyn, at Alberta and maybe to a lesser extent Saskatchewan? Even Wilkinson, the federal minister, has said, if Alberta is not compliant with the 2035 net zero objective, we're going to withhold transfer payments. This is how they force capitulation by a province that doesn't want to follow a federal dictate.
Well, that would be great. It'd be great if it did that, because Alberta's the one that's paying the transfer payments. They're not receiving any.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, but I think
there's been
we do get transfers. We get health transfers, social transfers, and infrastructure transfers. So when Ralph was the premier, he implemented a health policy that the federal government didn't like, and the federal government did withhold transfer payments back to us. So we give $60 billion a year now in federal taxes. We get back 27.
I wouldn't call them transfer payments. They're part of broad funding across the country for healthcare and other things.
Yeah.
And I think this is too hypothetical. I'm just, if they did that, there would be such an uprising. So I'm not worried about that.
But they've done that before.
They may have done it before, but I'll tell you right now.
Yeah.
If they ever wanted to get Albertans really up in the air, and that would do it. And the fact is, they're not going to do it. They don't have the stomach for it, even if they want to.
Well, it'll be interesting to see.
So I have a question about the domino effect here in regards to the carbon taxes. Of course, ultimately, it affects oil and gas industry first, I would think. But going down the road, as the other dominoes fall, how long do you think it might take for Canada's industrial complex to come to a grinding halt?
Well, I guess, the reality is that it's not Alberta that's being harmed. Alberta has the best growth, the best economy in the country right now by far. It's the only province that's really growing, and they're in a buoyant period for a whole bunch of reasons, and so Alberta's not hurting, to say the least, and they're way ahead of the rest of the country right now in terms of the economic growth and so on. So it's one of the net zero stuff. Ultimately, the only thing we can do is to continue to try and protect, as Dennis was referring to earlier, protect Alberta from stuff they might try to do. And I think we have the right premier in that case to deal with that. And I think we have, a province that, is doing really well, but also there's that feeling, enough is enough.
Yeah.
And I think that that would be, you would have one of the biggest upheavals in the history of the country, and there's not those two weaklings that are running the country right now don't have a stomach for that.
Well, they're ideologues, and, they may want to die on their ideological sword to carry this as far as they can. We don't really know for sure. But let me take you back in time to the national energy policy. It was interesting. We have the video clip of Marc Lalonde because you'll remember he was the Minister of Finance at the
Are you
time.
kidding? I don't remember. They almost killed my company.
Yeah, I'm sure you remember very well. But you know, remember the NEP, it was sold as a means of shifting wealth from Alberta to poorer regions in the country so they could have similar social programs, ostensibly. But it was very telling to actually hear Mark Lalonde say, we could not, because you'll remember at that time in the 70s, Alberta was becoming the center of economic power in Canada. The 5 major banks were planning to move their head offices to Calgary. Um, and yeah, I mean, there was a tremendous demographic shift of people and businesses from elsewhere in Canada and elsewhere in the world coming to Alberta. You'll remember all that. Why? Liquid gold. But they used the national energy policy as a means of stopping Alberta's rise. Mark Lalonde, quote, said, we could not let Alberta become the center of economic power in Canada. That is a quote.
Well, it's also just history, Dennis, and I'm not too interested in going through all the history. I lived through there. Right now, I think what's important to Albertans right now is what's happening right now. And what's happening right now is that there's Alberta is, let's put it this way, is thriving despite all of the people outside of Alberta, in Ottawa, I should say, who are working against us. And I think that I just have a lot of confidence that you know, Alberta is going to be. We've been through it before, as you said before, in several ways. And Alberta is got the economic power. It's got a lot of things that are really important to the country, and they're doing well. And so I'm not worried about the government trying to attack them because they are the other way. It's really the other way around. How are we going to keep them in the country?
So how are we going to keep Alberta in the country?
Yeah, that's another discussion.
Yeah.
Because at a certain point, enough is enough. So I think that I'm not too worried about Alberta right now. They're doing really well, and they're going to stand up to whatever the federal government tries to do.
So as you know, the Premier has passed through legislation the Alberta Sovereignty Act within a united Canada.
Yeah.
And they want to be able to use that to push back against federal dictates and legislation that harms Alberta's interests. But we've seen over time the progressive usurpation of provincial constitutional authority by the federal government in a number of areas. We've not been able to solve that problem. Example, we had a referendum in Alberta, as you know, not too long ago, October of 2021, to end equalization. Nothing has happened with that. And the reason is because nothing could happen. In order to end equalization, Kenny was smart enough not to pursue it. It was virtue signaling only. The reason you couldn't end equalization is you couldn't overcome the 5 hurdles to change the Constitution. And Kenny knew that. So nothing has happened. Point here is that I'm worried about the Impact Assessment Act. If the Supreme Court rules that that is a legal issue, the provincial government has no way of pushing back against that. It doesn't have, there's the imbalance in power can't be overcome. There is a way to do it, but it can't be done through constitutional change.
So Dennis, I see a question up here asking me how can we protect Alberta? I think that that Alberta, you know, one of the things that gives everybody, whether you're in the animal kingdom or where you are, a good defense is strength. And I think that Alberta has this ability to have it, it's got it strong enough to protect itself. And I think right now, there's no point in theorizing what's going to happen next. But the way we protect yourself physically as a person or a province or whatever is by being strong. And I think that Albertans need to come together, and they have to understand that if they're wishy or washy around this, what's happening to them or what the government's trying to do to them, that's going to help the federal government. So Albertans have to understand that their only protection is our own protection of our strength and the possibility of what might happen. Of really, well, it would be kind of a shield against what people, because you're not going to attack someone that's too strong.
Well, we've seen over the years, especially since Pierre Elliott Trudeau came in, and then now we've got Justin, progressively attacking our hydrocarbon industry. This really personally bothers me a lot as a proud Albertan. So I could say I'm an Albertan first, a Canadian second. I'll put it that way. You might be a Canadian first and an Albertan second, whatever. The point is that Alberta can be strong, but it can't overcome, federal dictates and, that we can't control, that are out of our control, that are constitutionally with federal control. And that's the problem. I mean, it's one thing to say we're strong economically, but we're not strong politically when you look at federal provincial relations.
Well, I think here's I'm a realist. I don't tilt at too many windmills. The reality is that we can't get rid of. The only way we're going to get rid of those two guys in Ottawa that run the country is to have an election, and we have to endure until that point. But we can't change that until we all we can do is really be prickly enough, if you like, that people, they're not going to want to come and get a bunch of quills in their eye. So I think that's all we can do, because we can't change. None of that's going to change until we get Pierre Poilievre as the Prime Minister.
Okay, so and there's no guarantee that will happen either. I mean,
the polls, guarantee of me getting up tomorrow morning and still living.
Listen, you're running miles every day. You're going to live to 120. I know that already. But let me tell you that we've had a number of discussions with people high up in the political realm within the Alberta political environment, and there's a 2-minute video clip. The Alberta Prosperity Project and Rebel News hosted a UCP leadership forum in which Ezra Levant from Rebel News posed a question to Daniel Smith, and it was an interesting response. Did you see that? Were you aware of that?
I don't think so.
I don't know, Chris, if you've got it, if you can show it, but fundamentally, it's just 2 minutes. And Ezra said words to the effect that and this is a question that was posed to all of the panelists, if you find yourself dealing with the federal government, is there a point in which you may come to where you cannot deal effectively with the federal government? Do you have a solution for that? And if not, how can we take you seriously? I'm just paraphrasing what I remember Ezra saying. And her response was the Alberta Prosperity Project. What she was referring to was this is it. So listen to this.
Quebec, for centuries, has been minority, a linguistic minority, cultural, economic minority, but they did something different. They had an or else added to the end of it. How far are you willing to go? Are you willing to say, we want these things or else? At what stage would you, for example, invoke the Clarity Act as clarified by the Supreme Court? For example, calling a referendum on the Clarity Act question of secession. Do you have an or else in mind? What is it, and what would make you use it? And if not, how are you serious? And I'll start off with Danielle Smith on that one.
The or else is Dennis Modry and the Alberta Prosperity Project. It's true. We proclaimed into law on April the 7th the Citizen Initiative Act, which gives the people the power to collect signatures for a petition campaign to propose an amendment. If it's a simple matter of policy, it's a 10% threshold. If it's a constitutional change, it's a 20% threshold. That would mean 600,000 signatures. And as I understand it, Dr. Modry has 1 million people on his database. So part of when I decided I wanted to run, I knew how important it was to make sure that we address the issues of autonomy. And I talked to Dr. Modry as one of my first steps. I said, let's try this together. Let's get as much autonomy as we can, full well knowing that he's got the power, you've got the power. If we're not successful, and this is why I take your movement very, very seriously, and why Justin Trudeau should take it very, very seriously too, because you have the power to be able to be the or else.
So that's interesting, isn't it? So the point,
very interesting. Yeah.
It is interesting. So one of the things that's really important to understand about the Clarity Act is, as you know, that came about as the Quebec secession reference when the federal government said, does a province have the right to unilaterally leave Canada? The whole point that I'm getting at is leverage. And you, as a very prominent businessman, understand leverage. So on the issue of leverage, the Clarity Act does require for a province to leave Canada. It requires a clear question with a clear outcome, and you have to negotiate also, or you also have to have input from other political parties in the province, as well as the Indigenous population. But the most important point, Gwyn, to understand in the Clarity Act is the 4th paragraph, last line, which states, and I quote, negotiations might lead to secession. So at some point in the next couple of years, Danielle Smith will receive, her government will receive a petition on secession drafted by the constitutional lawyers on our board. She will then be forced to have a referendum on secession, which won't happen until we know from polling that there is a plurality of people who will support empowering the Alberta provincial government to negotiate from a position of strength. And those negotiations may or may not result in Alberta leaving Canada, but what it will result in is Alberta, along with other provinces, getting a much better deal within Confederation. That's what it can do. That's what we're working on in terms of trying to do something to empower our provincial government. It's one thing to say we have economic power. We do in this province, but we don't have political power. And what we want Danielle and her UCP team to have is political power.
Yeah,
Can I say something?
I can see that is useful because there always is a point, but the other thing, of course, is you have to be careful that we're not sort of relying on something that it's not likely to happen. I mean, the polls show that people in Alberta aren't ready to leave yet, so they have to get mad as hell, and so if I'm not going to give, I guess I shouldn't give the federal government, Trudeau, and any credit at all, but they'd have to be really stupid to get people mad enough, and they can do that. And if they do that, that what you're talking about, Dennis, you've got the ammunition ready to go.
And let me give you one interesting poll, Gwyn. I think you'll appreciate this. Angus Reid, on February the 4th of 2022, released a poll in which it was a national poll. And the question that they posed, you might remember this. The question that they posed is, are you disillusioned with the federal government? In Alberta, 73% of Albertans were disillusioned with the federal government. In Saskatchewan, it was even higher at 76%. So if you drill down on the 73% in Alberta, 33% want it out of Canada. 40% want a better deal within Confederation. Hence, it gets to the point, if Danielle is empowered with that referendum, she can negotiate a better deal within Confederation. But it will benefit the rest of Canada as well. We need to fix this. We need to fix our Confederation.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I guess I really believe that if it weren't for those two guys in Ottawa, we wouldn't even be talking about this. And so I wouldn't want to see the whole country broken up like that just because we got two idiots in Ottawa and we don't wait for them to get. So that is when we know that, of course, that if and so does most other people, that if Alberta left, there's a whole bunch of issues like we're landlocked for one thing. So that's a big one, and so there is some practical, a lot of people are saying if you're not careful, we'll call your bluff because you can't do anything anyways. But that's not where I'm coming from as somebody who loves Alberta. I'm coming from the point is that we don't want to take action that would destroy our country and our province if all it is because if Trudeau and that Gilbert or whatever the hell his name is can cause us that kind of a problem, then they're winning.
Mm-hmm. But
So
remember,
I just want
to let me just make this point because I want to follow up on what Gwyn just said. When I would push back on the issue of being landlocked, I would say we're policy locked. Even the United Nations Declaration on the Law of the Seas gives the right of landlocked countries access to tidewater. And as you know, the Alberta government, Saskatchewan government, and Manitoba government have come up with an agreement for a utility corridor to Port Nelson on the Hudson Bay. So,
by the way, I've looked at that very carefully, and I know a little bit about pipelines and stuff.
But you know a lot about it.
It's not it's totally impractical.
No, that's the one to Churchill. It's not impractical to Port Nelson because you don't have a muskeg problem going to Port Nelson.
Yeah, I still think it's tilting at windmills. The reality is we're going to get rid of these guys, and we're going to build pipelines, and at that point, so we're hopefully less than 2 years from getting rid of these guys. I'm not going to break up the country for waiting for that.
So
we
Gwyn,
look
I
at
have a
it
question.
from a different point of view. We look at it from a different point of view, Gwyn. Saving Alberta may just save the rest of the country.
Well,
that's the point we're getting.
All I'm saying is that I guess I made myself clear.
Yeah,
I
you did.
I don't want this to happen because of those two guys.
Yeah,
that's
okay.
all.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Ron, go
I
ahead.
was just going to ask you, with all your investigation and living in BC now regarding carbon taxes and oil and gas industry, what do you think the feeling is all across Canada? I know BC, they can be indifferent at times. I came across people like that when I was living in Victoria, and I was just wondering if you know what the feelings are, about those things, and also Alberta.
Well, I don't think people are too worried about what's happening in Alberta. I mean, they're pretty internally focused here, but I think that the people here are not, they're a lot more reasonable, if you can put it that way. They're not just for everybody for themselves. And I think that more and more people are beginning to wonder a lot of them are really beginning to wonder about the carbon taxes and what's happening here. That is, if there's one thing that unifies the country, it's the carbon tax, because it is so unpopular here. And one of the things that the government here is facing is they have their own carbon tax. And I'm not sure how long it's going to be as this gets worse and worse and the grocery prices go up and everything, that people aren't going to say, well, why are we playing this game?
Mhm.
And I think I'd be willing to bet that there's going to be a point where they.
Well, it's interesting to point out that in Alberta, of course, we have very low oil prices and gas prices, and yet we seem to be the most concerned across Canada about this right now. I have friends that live in Victoria, and of course, they don't have to drive very far, so a lot of them don't seem to be too concerned about the price of a gallon of gasoline. But we seem to be more concerned here, and I don't know what the feeling is across Canada, but at least that's the feeling I'm getting. So.
Oh, well, I don't think that's right. I mean, I think that people have a lot of concern about gasoline prices.
Okay.
And Victoria is not the good place to measure it. To go to Vancouver, where they have the highest gas prices in the country because of all these taxes and everything. And this is becoming more and more of an issue here. So I don't think we have. I don't think we're necessarily divided bedfellows on that issue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So if we were to sum up, basically, Gwyn, you feel as though once we get rid of the intellectually challenged individuals running our federal government, that we'll be in far better shape for the country to thrive and to get rid of carbon taxes and to build pipelines, and life goes on. That's
Well, absolutely. And my great friend Stephen Harper, who I was very close through his whole thing, he understood this stuff,
Mhm.
and it's only since this the second Trudeau. I always think, I have to add this. Trudeau 1 just about killed the company, and Trudeau 2 is going to kill the country.
Yeah, I know.
So
Yeah,
maybe you could.
it does
Go ahead,
seem as though Trudeau number 2, I refer to him as Trudeau Light, is really trying to finish off what Trudeau number 1 already did to our hydrocarbon industry, and I mean, he's made no bones about the goal of ending hydrocarbon use, and he never talks about the fact that there's 6,000 products plus that emanate from a barrel of oil.
You can't, just like you're talking about with trying to question the global warming, you can't usually engage in a debate when 99% of the people have a different opinion. But what you can do is deal with the symptoms and the reality of things. And Alberta has to, it's the biggest thing, Dennis, for the Alberta Prosperity Project, is to make sure that as much as possible, we're as strong as we can be. And we've got a premier that is not going to take shit too much.
No.
Help us if she'd have lost. We almost did, as you know. And so I think we've got quite a few ways in which we can be pretty prickly and wait until we get rid of the guys in Ottawa.
Well, I think Danielle can truly be the Iron Lady, if we can draw an analogy to Maggie Thatcher. I think she has the capability. I think she has the intelligence, and I think she's got the chutzpah to take on the federal government. I just worry, like a chess game, what will she do with that Impact Assessment Act? I mean, it's like the question Ezra Levant, posed. what leverage do we have against the federal government killing us, and politically, which kills us economically? So, any case, it's a fascinating discussion, Gwyn. I mean, you've had such an experience in the hydrocarbon business. Let me ask you a question. Do you think, and this is a good question for you, my opinion is that if you look at the Allen report, and you know the Steve Allen's report that looked at foreign and domestic spending to landlock our natural resources,
Yeah.
$1.3 billion was spent between 2003 and 2019. $1.3 billion by Tides Foundation, et cetera, et cetera. Some of that money came from our federal government. Where I'm going with this is, it seems to me that the energy industry itself hasn't done a very effective job in pushing back against the climate narrative. What would your response to that be?
Well, I think that I've been saying this over and over. I mean, it really is that when you're, no matter what you're doing, you choose your battles and you choose your times.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're dealing with something that's almost a religion and has been ingrained in people, that's not the place to start. And the word, so what I would say, and what I've done with my company over the years, is deal with the things I have to deal with that are really important at this time, and also be as strong as possible going into it.
Mm-hmm.
So they have as much, you got the cards and the strength. And so I think Alberta needs to maintain the strength. They need to be even just stronger and stronger. And that means also politically, because it's, we damn near lost the election. Mm-hmm. So I kind of worry about that, because a lot of people, the irony about this, of course, is we've had lots of people come in to get jobs, and it's been a great engine for them and their families. But when they're here, they don't realize what it is that makes the province work. And that's a danger.
Sorry, Gwyn, I have a question. I don't know how much longer you want to stay here.
I've almost got to go here really soon.
Yeah.
I just want to give you a plug on all the great articles that you publish and educating and enlightening people across Canada. And I suggest that they go to the National Post and the C2C Journal. I've read many articles, and they're actually terrific. And I think that's a good place for Albertans in particular to start and realize what's going on in this country. And they better start learning how to vote correctly, and so we can improve things here.
Thank you for that. And I'll just mention one thing. My wife is a rabble rouser. I mean, she's so with us, and she started C2C. She founded it.
Wow. Oh, interesting.
Very good.
Yeah.
Congratulations to her.
Yeah, and we kind of funded it.
Yeah. Why not?
Well, now we're getting other people involved in funding it, but it's
Sure.
become quite an important piece of conservative journalism in the country.
It is an excellent site for sure. A wide diversity in topics that are discussed there. So kudos to you and your wife for doing that.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know. I don't know how much to say myself. Dennis, do you want to submit some closing comments?
Well, my comment would be, Sean, thank you for reaching out to Gwyn, and Gwyn, thank you so much for being involved on this webinar. We'll see how things shake out over time. The Impact Assessment Act coming up is going to be maybe a line in the sand. We'll see what happens. But I really appreciate your comments and your insights, and I know many people feel exactly the way you do, and other people want to take a more aggressive approach with respect to the federal government. And we'll just have to wait and see how things evolve. But thank you very much. And hey, listen, I hope you're still running, many miles a day for the next 20 years at least.
Thank you. I'll try.
Okay.
Yeah. And one last thing, Gwyn. I'd like to personally thank you for coming on here. This was a very pleasant treat for me to get you on board, and I hopefully down the road we can have you back on and have a conversation about some other applicable items that are going on here in Canada. Okay, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gwyn, very much. Okay.